I have miles and miles ahead of me, tales to listen to, time to spend. Up ahead, the road is bending. Wonder what's around the bend.
Hello, I'm Charles Kuralt. We're off again to meet a few people on the back roads of America. These are people you know, not from the front pages. They've never been on the front pages. They're people you know from next door and down the block. Their stories are some of my favorites from 25 years on the road. We're off on an exotic trip this time, an exotic trip to the commonplace. That pole there spinning outside the barber shop, it didn't just appear, you know. Most likely, William Marvey made it.
How long does one of your barber poles last?
That's the trouble. That's the trouble. They last forever.
The mail must go through even to ships on the Detroit River. We'll watch the couriers of the J.W. Westcott make their appointed rounds. Hardly anything's as common as horseshoes. We'll meet some youngsters with an uncommon knack for throwing them. Nowadays, we take the size of our country for granted. Deep in an Arkansas swamp is a good reason not to. And talk about a big country. In Alaska, you can still find pioneers.
Homesteading works this way. The government gives you 160 acres of land, just gives it to you. Then you have to keep it. To do that, you have to live on the land most of the year. You have to clear at least 20 acres and plant it. The principal preoccupation of Alaska in this season is clearing land. Grown men are doing it. Little children are doing it. By bulldozer and by hand, the spruce forests somehow give way to plowed fields, and America's new pioneers turn homesteads into homes. But cutting a farm out of a wilderness was never easy. It wasn't easy in Tennessee, it wasn't easy in South Dakota, and out here on the new frontier, it's just as hard as ever. We met a homesteader when we stopped for coffee at the Frontier Cafe in Palmer. He was back in the kitchen cooking. What he was doing there was trying to make a little money. Ray Rouse, who 3 years ago was a discontented Pennsylvania tool and die maker, has learned what his predecessors of the last century learned. There's precious little money in homesteading. But even while he cooks, Ray Rouse dreams of his 160 acres in the hills. When we asked him if he'd show us the place, he was ready. He keeps his pack under the cafe's kitchen sink. So that is how it happened that the next day we found ourselves aboard an unlikely 6x6 truck with no brakes, no lights, and no license plates, slogging up a logging road toward Ray's place. It's 20 miles, he said, and a little hard to get to. The first 14 miles from town went all right. Then the truck settled into a mud hole, and we discovered that Ray's place was impossible to get to, at least that day. But it took a couple of hours of jacking up the truck and cutting cottonwood saplings to put under the tires before we made the discovery.
Helpless without chains and a winch in this kind of mud.
We left the truck there on the theory that anybody who could take it could have it. And we walked back to the highway. But homesteaders don't give up easily. If they did, there wouldn't be any. We were back next day with Ray Rouse's friend, Vic Lawyer, driving a weasel. The tracks only came off 11 times and only broke once.
Well, let's see if we can sneak up there a ways and all.
We made the trip in 6 hours, which may be a record for that road, and reached Ray Rouse's homestead in early afternoon.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It depends on how you look at it.
How long did it take you to build it?
About 2 months. Not, that's longer than it should take, but that's how long it took.
Does this cabin keep you warm in the winter?
Oh, yeah. Well, it does, and when it gets about 30 below, you got to feed the fire pretty good, and pretty steady, and quite often. You go through a cord in right short order. But it's nice. It's a lot nicer than I thought it would be. It's a lot prettier than I thought it would be. I kind of figured it'd just be black and white all the time. But it's not. It's green and black and white all the time.
The mosquitoes are pretty large and pretty numerous out here, aren't they?
Yeah, they come giant size and giant squadrons out here. I guess they say everything up here is big, and we got lots more of it. I guess mosquitoes is one thing that's bigger, and we got lots more of than most people.
Do they bother you?
Yeah, in the summertime they get pretty real sick, and they'll run you out of the house. You get outside for a few minutes, then they run you back in. But you have to live with them. I mean, yeah, they won't go away.
There must be a lot of discouragements.
Well, yeah, I get discouraged every once in a while for a few days at a time. You know, I get mad. I'm going to shoot everything and burn the place down and run off and leave the country. But after a couple of days, that wears off. I'll come back.
So there he is, at home, the new pioneer. We have a feeling Ray Rouse is not much different from the old pioneers. If you want to visit him 10 years from now, you'll find him right here. But you'd better be prepared to pass a big 6x6 truck stuck in the mud on the way to his cabin. It may still be there, too. Behind the barn back in North Carolina, this is the way we used to do it. That's not the way they do it around here. Around here, if you can't make 85 ringers out of every 100 shots from a distance of 40 feet, you might as well not show up because you haven't got a chance. This is the World Horseshoe Championships, a convention of the best barn lot horseshoe pitchers who ever hustled a fellow farmer. They come mostly from places with names like Bremen and Plattsburgh and Arcanum, places where a man can while away an afternoon perfecting his style and listening to the satisfying clank of a drop-forged shoe encircling an iron stake. Thus. Oh, they're good. They're real good. And some of them are legendary, like Elmer Hole, a calm Canadian carpenter who is the defending champ. And Bob West, a lumber mill owner from Scappoose, Oregon, whose deadly aim is the talk of the tournament. And yet none of these sharp-eyed old-timers is any better than a 13-year-old boy from right here in Eureka, Deadeye Williams, who competes at the under 16-year-old distance of 30 feet, cheered on by his horseshoe-playing mother and father in the stands, and his brother Jonathan, and his sisters Debbie and Cindy and Barbara, won the junior championship and was odds-on favorite to repeat. But Deadeye lost his title, and who'd he lose it to? Another brother, 12-year-old Jeff. Even when Deadeye and Jeff are just noodling around, as they were the day we met them, they still usually call out to the scorer 4 dead, which means 4 ringers, and thus no points for either player.
4 dead.
But when it came to playing for keeps, Jeff dethroned Deadeye with the help of a fortuitous incident.
Well, he had a broken finger, and I beat him.
How did he get a broken finger?
I called him a name.
What did you call him?
I called him a girl.
and then what happened?
And then he was ready to hit me, and they said he wouldn't hit me, and then he hit me.
And he broke his finger?
Yeah.
And the next day?
Next day, he didn't win it.
You won it?
Yeah.
34 straight ringers is merely the stuff of daydreams for most farm boys, but it's what Jeff Williams did in fact. So he's the junior champ. Youth was not served so well when it came to the grown-up championships. Foxy old Elmer Hold, dueling tensely late into the night in a hushed arena, held off the challenge of 19-year-old Mark Siebold of Huntington, Indiana, to retain his title. Elmer was all smiles that night, but if he expects to remain the champ forever, he'd better think again. He knows about Deadeye Williams and Jeff Williams, but he may not know about Nathan. There is yet another Williams brother, you see. Nathan is 7. And one night we watched him march to the 30-foot line, wind up with all his strength, and let fly. The smart money in Horseshoes is keeping an eye on Nathan. From a waterfront window, an ancient spyglass peers through the murk of a rainy day, focused on the distant bow of a big ship downward bound on the Detroit River. Satisfied with his sighting, the user of the telescope, Ed Primo, passes the word.
Calcite the second downbound, Jerry.
Okay, Ed.
And Jerome Lewandowski of the United States Postal Service takes a handful of mail from a box where it has been piling up for days, awaiting the passage of this vessel. So far, so good. But how does the mail get from the shore to the ship? Well, that is a 99-year-old story on the Detroit River involving a little boat and a lot of guts. The boat is the J.W. Westcott II, named for the nerveless riverman who started this madness in the summer of 1874. What the Westcott does is wait in mid-river like a minnow stalking a whale, and then at the right moment, bore into the side of the speeding ship and hang on for dear life, while mail, packages, and newspapers are passed up to the ship's deck in a bucket. There is a certain power in the sight of a freighter's bow from sea level to which one does not soon become accustomed. And even the Westcott's intrepid skippers find that sometimes their job gets a little rough. When he had time to talk, Captain Bill Jagano admitted as much.
Once you commit yourself, you don't dare stop. And then you follow the bow wave in, and you kind of roll in. And when she starts into that ship side, and sometimes it scares you a little bit, but you don't dare chicken out. You got to give it to her and keep her company.
The brave little J.W. Westcott II hangs onto the side of no fewer than 14,000 ships a year, sometimes sending pilots and reserve crewmen up a rope ladder, sometimes taking in the washing abruptly from above. Neither sun nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night, as we all know, stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds, to which the crew of the Westcott can add nor fogs, nor freezing gales, nor half the Detroit River coming over the bow. Get that mail in that bucket, and let's get out of here. Now you take this fella, the one who runs this barber shop in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Here's a man who could use a new barber pole. But he's had this pole since 1935, and he doesn't see any reason to get a new one. With that kind of tonsorial intransigence in mind, we sought out the country's last barber pole factory to see how things are doing. We found it on a side street in St. Paul, Minnesota, the William Marvey Company. In a room behind the ancient cash register, seated at his ancient roll-top desk, advised by his son Bob, who will inherit the business if there's anything left to inherit, William Marvey ponders the future of barber poles. You see, this country used to have 112,000 barbers. Then came long hair. Now there are only 80,000 barbers, and one by one, Mr. Marvey's competitors have gone out of business. That makes Roy Beatty the last barber pole inner cylinder roller in the USA, a distinction that makes him a little nervous since he's been doing this for 23 years, and he says he's forgotten how to do anything else. The red and white stripes of the barber pole go way back to the 13th century when barbers were surgeons on the side. the red stripe for blood, the white for bandages, the blue added by American barbers as a patriotic gesture. By further embellishments, for fancy barbers, a hairstylist pole, and for dog groomers, a poodle pole, and by selling a line of miniature poles for recreation rooms and dens, William Marvey has managed to stay in business. But it's the barbers he wants to persuade.
Many trades and professions had symbols years ago. The apothecary had the mortar and pestle, the pawnbroker had the three balls, the shoemaker had a symbol, the blacksmith had a symbol, the butcher had a symbol, the cigar store Indian was a symbol of a tobacco shop. All of these have fallen by the wayside, but fortunately the barber's been able to hold his symbol. And if he uses his brains, he'll have a pole in front of his establishment and take advantage of that unique situation he's in.
How long does one of your barber poles last?
That's the trouble. That's the trouble. They last forever.
This is a story about Napoleon and Jefferson and Talleyrand and foreign intrigue in Paris and an empire changing hands. And this is the best place to tell the story, a swamp in Arkansas. By the time we get down to the end of this rickety wooden footbridge into the swamp, you'll see what I mean. The year was 1803. This swamp, all of Arkansas, in fact, the whole central part of what is now the United States was French. The French called it all Louisiana. President Thomas Jefferson wanted one tiny part of that vast French empire. All he wanted for the United States was the city of New Orleans. Jefferson sent James Monroe as ambassador to Paris to join Ambassador Robert Livingston there to negotiate with Napoleon's foreign minister, Talleyrand, to buy New Orleans. They were authorized to pay as much as $7.5 million. What Monroe and Livingston didn't know was that Napoleon was plotting to declare himself Emperor of France and to go to war with England. He knew he didn't have the sea power to defend his vast possessions in the New World, and he knew that, therefore, England would probably just take them in the war to come. Bonaparte reasoned, why not get rid of all that land in advance? Why not sell it to the United States? So, a long way from this swamp, in a Parisian drawing room, Livingston, who'd been getting nowhere with Talleyrand trying to buy New Orleans, was flabbergasted to hear the foreign minister say, what if we sold you more than New Orleans? What would you give for the whole of Louisiana? By which he meant the whole of America between the Mississippi and the Rockies. The very next day, they agreed on a little land sale. Livingston didn't even know what he was buying. Lewis and Clark hadn't yet been west to see what was there. But they signed the papers before Napoleon could change his mind. $12 million for a third of a continent. The United States was suddenly doubled in size. This swamp was suddenly American. Well, if you own something, you have to survey it. And to survey something, you have to start somewhere. Because a meridian and baseline crossed in this swamp, this is where they started. The inscription says, this stone marks the base, established November 10th, 1815, from which the lands of the Louisiana Purchase were surveyed by United States engineers. If you live today in Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, your township boundaries, your section lines, the boundaries of your lot are based on this stone in the middle of a cypress swamp in Arkansas. This stone is a symbol of the American urge, the strongest urge in our history, to cross the rivers and head west. It's a symbol of the American itch to own a piece of land, to have it and hold it, enough for a flower garden or enough for a cattle ranch. The Louisiana Purchase gave us this swamp, gave us all of Arkansas, gave us Louisiana, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, part of Texas, most of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico for about 2 cents an acre. There were some in the Senate who said it was too much. But you'll notice that the French, who thought they were getting a good deal at the time, hardly ever talk about it anymore.
Well, time to say goodbye until our next trip together. We've heard about a story up the road here, but we kind of hope we never get there. With luck, we'll stumble upon something more interesting along the way. I can see the road is bending. Wonder what's around the bend.
All these years I've been a-wondering, just when I think I'm near the end, I always see the road is bending, and I wonder what's around